Do you hate spiders? Of course you do. Why wouldn't you? You know who else hates spiders? Dhalsim. Now this guy really hates spiders. And that's why there's absolutely no spiders in this deck. Let's talk about Voltron with Dhalsim, Pliable Pacifist. Welcome to the Commander's Beacon. I am Eric, and this channel is all about unconventional Commander decks and strategies. Now before we get started, don't forget to join us on Discord where we discuss unique ways to play in Magic the Gathering's best format, or maybe join us for some games. You can find the invite link to the Discord server in the description, and the server is open to everyone. And if you like what this channel is all about, feel free to support the Commander's Beacon directly through Patreon. Thank you to my awesome patrons. Patrons get to vote on upcoming content, you get access to patron-only Discord channels and roles, and you can request your own custom deck build and more, all while supporting the channel. And you can also find the Patreon link in the description. Okay, so let's talk about Dhalsim. You might recognize this very limber fellow from the Street Fighter franchise, and that's because Dhalsim is part of the Street Fighter Secret Lair crossover. Now, Secret Lairs are time-limited products that you can only purchase directly from Wizards of the Coast. Now, this particular card, Dhalsim, Pliable Pacifist, as well as the other iconic Street Fighter characters in the Secret Lair set, it is a mechanically unique card. In other words, this is a new card rather than alternative art for an existing card. At least for now. Now, Wizards has said they will reprint these Secret Lair crossover cards in Magic-themed versions that you can open in packs in the future. Now, there's always been varying degrees of controversy in the Magic community about whether mechanically unique Secret Lair cards, or even non-mechanically unique ones, are appropriate for the game, and I'm not going to get into that here. But enough about all of that. What does Dhalsim do? Well, Dhalsim is a 1/3 legendary human monk. He costs 2 green-white, he has reach, and he has teleport. Dhalsim Pliable Pacifist has hexproof unless he's attacking. He also has, whenever a creature you control with reach attacks, untap it, and it can't be blocked by creatures with greater power this combat. And he also has Fierce Punch. Whenever one or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, draw a card. So there's a lot of text on this card. First, Dhalsim protects himself. Again, he's hexproof unless he's attacking. He has evasion, and he even grants evasion and pseudo-vigilance to your other attacking creatures that have reach as well. He also has card draw, so you'll draw a card whenever you deal combat damage to an opponent. That's up to 3 cards per turn in a typical 4-player game, though extra combat steps and double strike and the like may increase that number. And with all of this going for him, Dhalsim is a pretty decent commander for a spider tribal deck, because spiders often have reach and low power. So they'll be able to attack and they'll be hard to block when you've got Dhalsim in play. They'll also untap themselves with Dhalsim's ability, and lots of spiders have high toughness, so they block well too. And of course you'll draw lots and lots of cards. And the best part about playing this way is that while Dhalsim has reach and he can make himself hard to block, well, if you've got a lot of creatures with reach in your deck, you'll never need to attack with Dhalsim, which is great because that means Dhalsim will always have hexproof. So he can just sit around being hard to remove while powering up your spider deck with card draw, evasion, and pseudo-vigilance. Admittedly, this is probably the strongest way to play Dhalsim. But don't do that to him, he hates spiders. So I actually built Dhalsim as sort of a theme deck. I practice martial arts, and I wanted a deck that encapsulated martial arts, but in Magic. To me, that meant a Voltron commander that uses attacking to win, but also that looks like a martial artist in the card art rather than some warrior or knight. Sorry, Rafik. Yes, there is Shu Yun, but Shu Yun is very aggressive, and I prefer defense. And in this regard, Dhalsim is perfect. So in this deck, we are all in on killing our opponents through combat with Dhalsim. We'll take advantage of Dhalsim's natural evasion to get in for combat damage and fill our hand. We'll use specific auras, equipment, and enchantments that help him deal extra combat damage without boosting his power, because that would make him easy to block. And we'll use some extra support cards that help protect Dhalsim, since he'll have hexproof most of the time, except of course when he's attacking. And actually I really like that part of the design because, sort of blanket, always on protection, like just hexproof without any stipulations to it. It's kind of annoying. It's not very fun to play against. But having Dhalsim lose his hexproof for short windows, I think makes the game more interesting and interactive. It makes Dhalsim less threatening as well, since your opponents know, or at least they think, they'll be able to kill it if you decide to attack them with it. So let's talk about how to play Magic like a martial artist with Dhalsim, Pliable Pacifist. And we'll start with the cards that help Dhalsim amplify his combat damage. So again, as a Voltron commander, Dhalsim has a lot going for him. He has protection, evasion, and card draw. He even has pseudo-vigilance, so he can block as well as attack. He's also a 1/3, so that's not great. And if you boost his power, he becomes much easier to block, but there are some ways around this. Auras like Gauntlets of Light and Treefolk Umbra let Dhalsim deal damage according to his toughness rather than his power. Now these are both 3-mana auras that give the enchanted creature +0/+2, and they have the enchanted creature assign combat damage equal to its toughness rather than its power. The Gauntlets of Light also lets you pay 2 and a white to untap the enchanted creature, which is fairly meaningless here since Dhalsim untaps himself whenever he attacks. The Treefolk Umbra is a bit better since it has totem armor, so it'll help protect Dhalsim. We've got Assault Formation, which is a bit similar, but it's a non-aura enchantment. For 1 and a green, this enchantment has each creature you control assign combat damage equal to its toughness rather than its power. It also lets your defenders attack as though they didn't have defender, which we don't have any defenders in this deck, so that doesn't matter. You can also pay 2 and a green to give all of your creatures +0/+1 until end of turn, effectively making them deal 1 more damage in combat. This is fairly expensive to activate and not usually worth it unless you have a large army of creatures, so we're not going to be using that activated ability too often in this deck, but it's a nice little bonus. And of course, Dhalsim can tag team with his bro, E-Honda Sumo Champion. E-Honda is 4 white for a 0/7 car-crushing human warrior. He has Sumo Spirit. As long as it's your turn, each creature assigns combat damage equal to its toughness rather than its power. And 100-handed Slap. Whenever E-Honda Sumo Champion attacks, up to 100 target creatures each get +0/+X until end of turn, where X is the number of cards in your hand. Now E-Honda can really pump up Dhalsim's damage, though unfortunately he doesn't have reach, so Dhalsim won't make E-Honda evasive. Now there are a few other cards that let your creatures deal damage with their toughness rather than their power. I haven't included them because they're either less efficient or easier to remove, and because we really can't use more than one of these effects on the battlefield at a time. And we should also be concerned that Dhalsim only has 3 toughness by default, so even if he's dealing damage with his toughness, we will need to boost it quite a bit to threaten our opponents. Fortunately, there are plenty of ways to generate value while boosting Dhalsim's toughness at the same time. Aland Umbra gives him +0/+4 and totem armor, so it protects him. A Robe of Stars is an awesome equipment. It gives +0/+3 and lets you pay 1 and a white to phase out the equipped creature. By the way, that'll also phase out the Robe of Stars itself too, since it's equipped to that creature. So if you leave up enough mana to activate it, your opponents will have a very difficult time removing Dhalsim or your Robe of Stars. Ensouled Scimitar is an equipment that gives the equipped creature +1/+5, but you can also pay 3 to turn Ensouled Scimitar into a 1/5 flying artifact creature until end of turn. So it can double as an evasive attacker to help you draw cards with Dhalsim. But we're also not completely reliant on having a high toughness and these effects like Assault Formation to take out our opponents. We do have a couple of other methods as well, such as Bronze Cudgels. This equipment costs 1, it equips for 1, and you can pay 2, and until end of turn, the equipped creature gets +X/+0, where X is the number of times this ability has resolved this turn. So the first time you activate Bronze Cudgels, the equipped creature will get +1/+0, and the next time it'll get an additional +2/+0, then +3/+0, and so on. So if you can activate Bronze Cudgels 6 times, that costs 12 mana, you'll be able to pump Dhalsim into 1-hit commander damage range with no other boosts to his damage output. And even though Bronze Cudgels boosts Dhalsim's power, It's really awesome here because you can activate it after blockers are declared, but before damage is dealt. In other words, after Dhalsim has gone unblocked. So effectively you can boost Dhalsim's power without making him easy to block. But we can do the same sort of effect with Scroll of the Masters. This 2-mana artifact gets a lore counter whenever you cast a non-creature spell, and this deck only has 6 creatures, so most of our spells are non-creature spells. Then you can pay 3 and tap it to give target creature +1/+1 until end of turn for each lore counter on Scroll of the Masters. Again, you can attack with Dhalsim, then activate this after the declare blocker step, letting you pump up Dhalsim's power without making him easier to block. Lastly, we have Quietus Spike. This equipment gives the equipped creature Death Touch, which is fine, but more importantly, when the equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, that player loses half their life rounded up. Now this typically won't kill anyone, but it will knock life totals down pretty reliably, especially since Dhalsim can do combat damage to players fairly easily. Now getting Dhalsim into one-shot commander damage range with Bronze Cudgels, or Scroll of the Masters, or killing someone with Quietus Spike, these things are doable, and we intend to do them, but they aren't trivially easy. And that's why we'll use things like Fire Shrieker, Duelist's Heritage, and True Conviction, which all provide double strike, effectively cutting in half the power that you'll need to reach with Dhalsim to commander damage someone to death, or letting you cut someone's life to around a quarter of its pre-combat value with Quietus Spike. Now just like our other effects, Double Strike increases Dhalsim's damage without increasing his power, so he'll still be hard to block. But Double Strike is also really useful for Dhalsim because he draws you a card whenever one or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player. So with Double Strike, you'll get to draw 2 cards instead of 1 when he attacks an opponent, assuming he's unblocked and gets in for damage. Now lastly, I want to mention Helm of the Host. This equipment doesn't really boost Dhalsim's damage output much, but it generates a ton of value when we equip it. Helm of the Host costs 4 and equips for 5, and it has, at the beginning of combat on your turn, create a token copy of the equipped creature, except the token isn't legendary if the equipped creature is legendary. That token gains haste. Now, it isn't hard to do dumb things with Helm of the Host in Magic the Gathering, but nonetheless, that's what we're going to do. We're going to equip Dhalsim with Helm of the Host and go to our combat phase. We'll make a token copy of Dhalsim, and that token won't be legendary. Both the original Dhalsim and the token can attack, and if they deal combat damage to different players, each one will trigger to draw us cards from both itself and the other Dhalsim doing combat damage. In this scenario, with 2 evasive Dhalsims attacking different opponents, we're drawing 4 cards, which is very impressive. And it only gets crazier if your opponents let this equipment stick around another turn. If you manage to get 2 Dhalsim tokens in addition to the original, or 3 total Dhalsims, then you can attack each opponent with one of them and draw 9 cards. But you can also just use Helm of the Host to keep your engine going against removal-heavy opponents. If you're worried that your opponents will use instant speed removal on Dhalsim when it attacks, since it won't have hexproof at that time, you can just leave your original Dhalsim back and only attack with the token copy. Sure, maybe your opponents will still kill it, but they'll probably feel kind of bad wasting removal on a token, and your original Dhalsim will still be around, ready to make another token copy for you on your next turn. So Helm of the Host is really awesome here. And so those are some of the methods that we'll use to take out our opponents with Dhalsim. Again, this is a Voltron deck, and our primary win condition is commander damage. So even though Dhalsim has some built-in protection, we will want extra insurance to make sure that he stays on the battlefield. Let's talk about that next. Now in this deck, we are all in on Dhalsim. If he is not on the battlefield, we don't get to play Magic. So let's make sure he's very hard to remove. We've mentioned a few totem auras, like Alandumbra and Treefolk Umbra, that will help protect Dhalsim. We'll also use Timely Ward. This aura has flash if it targets a commander, and it gives the enchanted creature indestructible. Blacksmith Skill, Tamiyo Safekeeping, Heroic Intervention, these are all instants that give amazing protection to Dhalsim. They give both hexproof and indestructible, so these will let him dodge a decent number of board wipes and any targeted removal. Remember again, he loses his native hexproof when he attacks, so we will want this additional help. Blacksmith Skill and Tamiyo Safekeeping cost just a single mana and protect a single creature, while Heroic Intervention protects all of your permanents. But if we carefully look at Dhalsim again, he has hexproof unless he's attacking. So let's use Reconnaissance. This one-mana enchantment lets you pay 0, that's called free, to remove target attacking creature you control from combat and untap it. So if your opponents decide to send a kill spell at Dhalsim when he's attacking and vulnerable, you can use Reconnaissance to remove him from combat at instant speed, giving him hexproof again since he's no longer attacking, and effectively countering whatever targeted removal was aimed at him. Of course you won't do any combat damage this way, but at least your commander is still alive. Labyrinth of Skophos does the same, but on a land. And, well, it's very much not free. By paying 4 and tapping Labyrinth of Skophos, you can remove target attacking or blocking creature from combat. So this is pretty expensive to use, but again it's on a land, so the opportunity cost to put Labyrinth of Skophos in your deck is very low, and it can help protect your commander. And then we'll use Assault Suit. This equipment costs 4, it equips for 3, and it gives the equipped creature +2/+2 in haste, and the equipped creature can't be sacrificed. Now, Assault Suit can also be used to let you give your creature to your opponents during their turns to help it attack other players, but you probably don't want to give your opponents more card draw. Assault Suit is clunky, kind of expensive, it boosts Dhalsim's power so he'll be easier to block, but it is a necessary evil, because when we're playing a Voltron deck we will need some way to protect our commander from sacrifice effects, which otherwise would get around all of our protection, like Hexproof and Indestructible. And these effects would completely ruin our day otherwise. Now, of course, you could consider Sigarda Host of Herons instead of Assault Suit. This is another very reasonable way to keep your commander protected from sacrifice effects. I chose not to, just to keep the deck focused around Dhalsim as the attacker, and because we have a couple of effects that let us tutor for equipment in this deck, so we can find that Assault Suit if we need it. So those are some of the ways that we'll protect a Dhalsim. But Voltron decks also frequently have problems protecting their life total, since we won't often have blockers to deter enemy attackers. Now, Dhalsim does have basically vigilance, but he's still only a single blocker. Let's talk about how we'll prevent our opponents from running over us while we Voltron them to death. And let's talk about everyone's favorite subject. It's stacks. We can take advantage of Dhalsim's low power and his pseudo-vigilance to lock down our opponent's creatures with minimal effect on our own game plan. A Meekstone, for example, is an artifact that says creatures with power 3 or greater don't untap during their controller's untap steps. There's Ensnaring Bridge. Creatures with power greater than the number of cards in your hand can't attack. So as long as you've got at least one card in hand, Dhalsim will be able to attack most of the time, but your opponent's biggest creatures might not be able to. There's Noetic Scales. This artifact triggers during each player's upkeep to have that player return to its owner's hand each creature they control with power greater than the number of cards in their hand. And I love Storage Matrix. This artifact has, as long as it's untapped, each player chooses artifact, creature, or land during their untap step. That player can untap only permanents of the chosen type this step. Now, Storage Matrix affects all players, and we're not going to be tapping it during our turn to avoid the effect, so it's completely fair, except that it isn't. Dhalsim generously untaps himself, so we won't need to untap our own creatures during our untap step. Now we're in green, so most of our ramp is land ramp, so we have very few artifacts that tap to do anything, which means we can choose to untap our lands with Storage Matrix very easily most of the time, while our opponents will need to make some very difficult decisions. We'll also use Hushbringer and Strict Proctor to help prevent our opponents from abusing ETB effects. These are also flying creatures, so they can attack our opponents and get in for combat damage easily, letting us draw more cards with Dhalsim. Blind Obedience slows down our opponent's creatures and artifacts, making them enter tapped, and it gives us some life gain with Extort. But we also have other ways to reduce our opponent's ability to hit us. Because we're using a Voltron strategy centered around a single creature with low power, we can use selective removal to decimate our opponent's creatures with minimal effect on our own. For just 3 mana, for example, Slaughter the Strong has each player choose any number of creatures they control with total power 4 or less, and then sacrifice the rest. Single Combat and Promise of Loyalty have each player pick one creature they control and sacrifice the rest. Single Combat also prevents players from casting creature spells until the end of your next turn, and Promise of Loyalty has players put a vow counter on their remaining creature, and as long as it has a Val counter on it, that creature can't attack you or planeswalkers you control. And again, I like that these are sacrifice effects, so they'll get around things like Indestructible. And then there's Wave of Reckoning, which has each creature deal damage to itself equal to its power. This will kill most creatures, but typically not Dhalsim since his power is less than his toughness. So those are some of the ways that will keep our opponent's creatures from pressuring our life total. Now let's talk about some of the other cards that help make this deck function. Dhalsim provides us with a decent amount of card advantage, but we have a few other card draw enablers. A white and green aren't the best at card draw unless you have lots of creatures, or large creatures, and we have neither. So our card draw mostly relies on attacking with Dhalsim, which we're going to be doing anyways. Keen Sense, Snake Umbra, and Rogue's Gloves are auras or equipment that all give us a card draw when Dhalsim deals combat damage to a player. Snake Umbra also grants Totem Armor. These are great when Dhalsim has Double Strike as well, by the way. Tome of Legends basically draws us cards just by attacking with Dhalsim. This 2-mana artifact enters the battlefield with a page counter on it, and it gets a page counter whenever your commander enters the battlefield or attacks. And you can pay 1 and tap it and remove a page counter from it to draw a card. Now for ramp, we'll use standard green land-based ramp. I'm not going to mention a lot of it here, but you can see the link to the full deck list in the description. However, I will use one with nature. This aura costs just a single mana, and when the enchanted creature deals combat damage to a player, you get to go get a basic from your library and put it onto the battlefield. Also, great with Double Strike. Cartographer's Hawk is a 2/1 flyer that ramps you when it deals combat damage to a player, as long as that player has more lands than you. But it's also another evasive creature that can draw you more cards with Dhalsim. Now since we're heavily reliant on specific auras or equipment to finish the game with Dhalsim, we'll use tutors like Steel Shaper's Gift, Open the Armory, and Sterling Grove, which can all help us find those win conditions. And then we'll play some graveyard recursion cards to help get them back if our opponents destroy them. I like Road of Return. This sorcery costs green, and it lets you choose one. Return target permanent card from your graveyard to your hand, or put your commander into your hand from the command zone. It also has Entwine too, so if you cast it for 2 green, you can do both. We're so reliant on our commander in this deck that I like having Road of Return here, just to make sure that a high commander tax doesn't take us out of the game. By the way, we're also using Command Beacon in our land slot for the same reason. Now I also like You Happen on a Glade. This is a 3-mana instant, it's also modal. You choose one. Either search your library for 2 basic lands, put them into your hand, or return target permanent card from your graveyard to your hand. So this will either help you make your land drops, or recur something from your graveyard. And then we'll round out our recursion package with Savin's Reclamation and Reclaim. And that is the deck. Again, I didn't mention every card, but you can always see the link to the full deck list in the description. And now let's go over the deck stats and cost. Alright, deck stats. Dhalsim is a very efficient pacifist, and the average mana value of this deck is just 2.53. Combined with Dhalsim's built-in card advantage, you shouldn't have much trouble getting this deck to function pretty consistently. We have 20 auras, equipment, or other permanents that buff Dhalsim in some way. These might provide card draw like Keen Sense, or create more Dhalsims like Helm of the Host, or pump up Dhalsim's damage like Bronze Cudgels. Now, having 20 of these buff cards might not seem like a lot, but we're also not playing an auras or equipments deck. We don't really get any benefit in this deck just from casting a bunch of random artifacts or enchantments. So I chose to use really specific buff spells that would help keep Dhalsim alive, or amplify his abilities to generate value, or just help him deal lots of damage. Now we also have 8 stacks pieces in this deck, again mostly intended to keep your opponent's creatures from knocking your teeth out. This deck has 5 card draw cards, not counting the commander, but again we have exactly one game plan, and that involves tickling our opponents to death with Dhalsim until we can find our enablers that make him hit harder. And whenever we do that, we draw cards, so we don't often need a lot of extra card draw. And we're also running 11 ramp spells. We really want Dhalsim as early as possible, and so all of these ramp spells are 2 mana or less, so that we can hopefully cast Dhalsim on turn 3. This deck has 5 pieces of single target removal and 6 board wipes. I've trended away from single target removal in this deck and towards board wipes to help keep our opponent's battlefields clear of creatures that might kill us. And again, we've chosen a lot of these board wipes, like Wave of Reckoning, to kill most creatures but leave Dhalsim alive. Now, at the time of this recording, this deck has a value of $233.80 on TCGplayer.com. Keep in mind that this price does not include the cost of Dhalsim himself, or E Honda, which is in the 99, since those cards aren't released yet and don't have prices. So that is Dhalsim, Pliable Pacifist. Voltron as a strategy generally leaves you vulnerable to your commander being removed or otherwise incapacitated. And while that's true of Dhalsim as well, the fact that he's hexproof except when he's attacking makes it a lot harder for your opponents to deal with him. But he's also got that built-in evasion and card draw, which is really awesome. The only thing Dhalsim innately lacks is damage, and well, of course that's relevant because that's how you're going to win the game. I mean, given that he's got protection, card draw, and evasion already, I still argue that Dhalsim makes a pretty strong Voltron commander. Now, because you will be reliant on other specific cards in the deck to help you push your damage with Dhalsim, the deck will play more slowly than a lot of other Voltron decks. You'll use Dhalsim's card draw for value, and your stacks pieces for removal and to slow your opponents down, until you can assemble your enablers that will let you get in for lots of combat damage with Dhalsim. But that is all I've got for today. Let me know what you think of Dhalsim as a Voltron commander. I think it's super fitting thematically, since Street Fighter characters are supposed to be these really amazing and tough unarmed duelists. I might try to build a couple more Street Fighter commander decks in the coming weeks with that same attack-focused, single creature Voltron theme. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, or better yet, in the Commander's Beacon Discord. And if you like this content, please hit that like button or subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you want to further support the channel, please check out our Patreon page. Patrons get to vote on upcoming content, among other things. You can find the link to the Discord and the Patreon in the description. Anyways, thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.